President Trump says he asked Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to investigate land seizures and farmer killings in South Africa. Now, last night, he cited Fox News host Tucker Carlson in a tweet after watching a segment on the issue. The president quoted Carlson saying the South African government is now seizing land from white farmers. He also cited the, quote, large-scale killing of farmers.
South Africa's government fired back at the president, saying it, quote, totally rejects this narrow perception, which only seeks to divide our nation and remind us of our colonial past. Well, the government went on to say it will speed up the pace of land reform in a careful and inclusive manner. So for more on this now, we want to bring in CBS News foreign correspondent Debora Patta. She's with us now on the phone from Istanbul. So, Debora, you've been following this story very closely, obviously. You live in South Africa. Can you first explain what exactly the land seizure policy is and where it has come from?
Well, it is true that President Cyril Ramaphosa, South Africa's president, has said that he wants to speed up land reform in South Africa to right what essentially he says is a grave historical injustice against black South Africans. Even after apartheid's end in 1994, 24 years later, the white community, which makes up about 8% of South Africa's population, still owns 72% of farms, compared to roughly about 4% in the hands of black South Africans. And this, Cyril Ramaphosa says, is wrong, and so they want to speed up land reform. And a few weeks ago, he announced the plans of his party and the policy of the African National Congress, saying that he would push ahead to try and amend the South African Constitution to allow for land expropriation without compensation.
So, Debora, take us through the fact and the fiction of President Trump's tweet and the reporting that he's citing from Fox News on these farmland seizures and the large-scale killing of farmers. And specifically, the president in his tweet mentioned white farmers.
Well, that's where we get into a mess regarding the story. First of all, President Trump has conflated two issues, the one being land seizures and the other being the killing of so-called white farmers in South Africa. Land seizures have not begun in South Africa. As I mentioned, this is an issue that Cyril Ramaphosa has to take to Parliament. He needs a two-thirds majority to change the Constitution. The ANC does not have a two-thirds majority in South Africa. It would need the support of another party, and even if it were to happen, it would probably go through a series of legal challenges and finally end up in the Constitutional Court. So that cannot happen for some time to come. The president based his tweet on a report on Fox News by Tucker Carlson, who said that the land seizures has begun. As I said, that has not happened. He also said that there was large-scale killing of white farmers. It's referred to by white right-wing organizations in South Africa as the white genocide. But the facts simply do not bear this out. In fact, the killing of farmers in South Africa has decreased since its peak, which was probably in 1998. I think in the last year it was just about 40 farmers that were killed. And when they refer to farm killings, it covers everybody on a farm. White farmers, black farm workers, domestic abuse. There's no sort of differentiation there. But this is not an issue where white farmers are being targeted because of their race, because criminals want to steal their land. It is part of a problem in South Africa, which does have a high crime rate. So to actually conflate it, A, with land seizures, it has nothing to do with that, and B, as an issue against white South Africans, is simply and blatantly untrue. And I think that is what a lot of people are objecting to, that first of all, this Fox News report has come out with something which actually, if a report like that was done by a local broadcaster in South Africa, could well be taken before the Broadcast Complaints Commission because it is factually not true. And then secondly, the president's tweet, which repeated the misinformation and then conflated two issues which had absolutely nothing to do with each other and in the statistics. The statistics do not bear out this issue that white farmers are deliberately being targeted because of their race. This is a narrative being perpetuated by white right-wing organizations in South Africa.
So let's talk a little bit about at least one right-wing organization that we've talked about that's sort of capitalizing on this, calling this a white genocide. What's going on in the country that they're sort of pushing this narrative even without any evidence?
It's been going on for some time now that there is this deliberate targeting of white farmers. And it's kind of one way in which the right-wing organizers in South Africa. In fact, this group, AfriForum, actually went on a tour of America a couple of months ago where they visited a lot of organizations to try and push this narrative. And in fact, amongst the targeted people they visited was none other than Tucker Carlson of Fox News, and also the Cato Institute, a representative that was interviewed on the Fox News program, and a number of other institutions which they base their, position on, and which they wanted to try and push this agenda. To say that farm murders are significantly higher than any other crime in South Africa, as I've already said, is simply untrue. It's a way of pushing their narrative. There are still South Africans who don't support a black government in South Africa. Racism, even though it is outlawed now in South Africa, does still exist. Does there need to be a conversation about land in South Africa? Absolutely. 24 years in, there needs to be a discussion about how land is shared in South Africa. But the way this organization, AfriForum, has gone about it is not one that is supported widely in South Africa. The issue of land reform is a very, very divisive issue. There is nothing that sets tongues and hearts aflame in South Africa. People get very passionate when they talk about it. But we also have to bear in mind there is an election in South Africa next year. This is an election issue, and Cyril Ramaphosa needs to win big because the ANC has suffered a lot of damage after nearly a decade of corrupt rule under former President Zuma. And this is one issue which touches the hearts of black South Africans and could get him support. But at the moment, it's an issue on paper.
Yeah, and Debora, finally, I guess, it's just surprising, I think, and interesting why Fox News would actually choose to focus on South Africa out of all the 54 countries on the continent, all the issues that are facing Africa, and that the President of the United States would then suggest to the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, that he look into a sovereign nation's internal issues. And we just threw up a tweet, and I just want to give the context of that tweet. We had a tweet from Patrick Gaspard. He's the former U.S. ambassador to South Africa under President Obama, and he tweeted this: "The President of the United States needs political distractions to turn our gaze away from his criminal cabal." And so he's attacking South Africa with the disproven racial myth of large-scale killings of farmers. This man has never visited the continent and has no discernible Africa policy. In South Africa, Debora, is there a sense from the government and from just Main Street South Africans that the United States has any kind of policy towards the country other than the status quo?
No, and I think there's a lot of frustration because Trump has made very disparaging remarks about Africa in the past, including South Africa. And so I think there is a lot of ill will in terms of how America views South Africa. The South African government has responded saying that they will take this up through diplomatic channels, but this is based on misinformation. And a lot of South Africans who are quite well informed about international affairs say it's an interesting week for President Trump to try and change the national dialogue. In a week when you have so many issues affecting the White House, perhaps what many commentators are saying is the worst week for the Trump White House, he chooses to focus on another issue and try and change the national dialogue. It doesn't seem to be working, as Gaspard's tweet would indicate.
And we should point out that although the president, to my knowledge, has never visited the continent of Africa, his wife, the First Lady Melania Trump, is going to be taking her first solo trip in October.
Do we know if she'll go to South Africa?
I don't know what the agenda is. Debora will probably be, tracking the First Lady's movements when she does make that trip. But again, let's remember the president called other countries in South Africa S-hole countries. And so it is interesting that the First Lady has chosen her first solo trip to be on the continent.